Okay, I leave it on already.
So, if you'd like to, whatever way you want to dispose yourself over there. Ladies and gentlemen, could I have your attention, please? Okay, the doors are closed, so we are about to commence this final formal session of the day. It's been a busy and an engaged day. Any of the sessions that I sat in on were certainly marked by very considerable discussion and energy, and I think that's very much moving on or following on from yesterday. We had 8 parallel sessions today over 4 community of practice, and we're going to hear the key messages from some of the moderators in a moment. But I want to give you a small taste of some of the things that happened today and that will be expressed in more detail by our colleagues in a moment. Each session has been designed to put countries at the centre of the discussion, allowing other countries and partners from across the networks to learn from what they're doing and to identify how they can support them. We heard once again the importance of working together across stakeholder groups and across sectors to achieve our collective goals. However, to do this effectively, we must have in place the necessary frameworks to build trust and address conflicts of interest where they arise for all stakeholders. That word trust is the essential ingredient for partnership and effective action. We heard about country good practice in areas such as the development of dashboards for the communication of data to decision makers, but also the challenges of ensuring sustainability of such tools. We heard that common results frameworks are important for aligning multi-sectoral actions. However, we must not tie ourselves in knots over overly complex processes or trying to reflect every aspect of every stakeholder's agenda. I think this is a critically important issue. The need to avoid unnecessary complexity, because unnecessary complexity brings additional strain on that most scarce of resources, administrative capacity. And in addition, just at the end of the morning, the roundtable on the contribution of science to the Sun movement underlined that academia is already an important partner in the movement at country level in a number of different countries, and we heard some very good examples of that. And we must now work together towards ensuring alignment between academics and policymakers, that other gap which sometimes is unnecessarily there. So now I'm delighted to ask Patricia, or Pat, as we know her in the Secretariat, to introduce you to the panel.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all participants. I would like to introduce the 5 moderators who are going to provide feedback from the first 8 sessions. Please welcome Professor Sue Horton from the University of Waterloo and Chair in Global Health Economics. In the past year, she has been a key person in shaping the thinking of the first community of practice on planning, costing, implementing, and financing multi-sectoral actions for nutrition. Today, she will present the conclusions on the development of a common results framework and on costing for nutrition in key sectors. Our second moderator is Anuradha Narayan, Director of the Global Partnerships for Spring, and a key person in catalyzing the emerging community of practice on social mobilization, advocacy, and communications. She will present the conclusions on developing and implementing effective strategies and on mobilizing societies for nutrition awareness, action, and accounting. A special thank you to our third moderator, Noel Marizzagre. He's the Regional Nutrition Advisor for UNICEF, and he has been the engine behind the organization of 2 African regional workshops that kick-started the emergence of systematic discussion on costing and financial tracking, and also most recently set the foundation for the community of practice on monitoring of progress and demonstrating results for nutrition. He will present the conclusions on the use of stakeholder mapping and dashboards to strengthen accountability around common results framework, and on the use of mobile and database technologies for reliable and timely information. Please welcome Professor David Pelletier, Associate Professor of Nutrition Policy at Cornell University, who will present the findings from the most recently emerging community of practice on functional capacities for coordinated and effective SUN actions. He will provide feedback on building of trust and leadership and on improving stakeholder alignment and engagement for nutrition. Finally, a special welcome and thank you to Professor Emon from Madol University. She has been a country network facilitator for the SUN movement since 2012, providing a consistent and relevant advice. Professor Emon will present the conclusions from the roundtable on the very timely topic on the contribution of science to the SUN movement. Thank you and wish you a very constructive deliberation.
So I'm going to report on the 2 sessions on the Common Results Framework and costing. So in the morning, we heard from 5 countries, Yemen, Pakistan, Laos, Tajikistan, and Ghana. And I'll summarize maybe 4 key points that were made. So firstly, on the Common Results Framework, it takes a surprisingly long time to set up the nutrition platform, especially the more comprehensive and more inclusive it is. Some countries had taken 2 years just to get through this process. But it's a worthwhile investment because if the platform includes the right people and is all-encompassing, it makes the job much easier after that. So participants did have some advice. They said, start with something, even if it's small. Be pragmatic and scale up as it becomes possible. Participants discussed difficulties involved with inclusion. Incorporating the private sector, business and research isn't something that's easily familiar to government participants, but it's well worth working on this. We had a lively discussion on conflicts of interest and how to involve private sector businesses in the nutrition platform. One country had a conflict of interest guidelines that was useful in allowing people to participate. In the afternoon, we moved on to talk about costing, a rather more technical session. Not ideally timed with regard to the post-lunch slump. But we had wonderful presenters from Togo, Namibia, Cambodia, Burundi, and Mali. And let me summarize again 4 messages. So we started out thinking about the distinction between nutrition-specific and nutrition-sensitive actions. And what is nutrition-sensitive is still a challenge. It's not all that well defined, and we still have open questions as to how to integrate agriculture, water and sanitation, for example, into the nutrition plan. The integration of nutrition-sensitive actions also parallels the integration of ministries into the group that is in the nutrition platform. The more you have other ministries buying in, the more likely it is to have nutrition-sensitive actions included also in the plan. Again, there was a lively discussion about civil society. In one case, so one issue was that CSO plays different roles. In some countries, they are a force for accountability, asking for accountability by other actors, including the government. In other cases, they are actually implementing interventions. Sometimes there are differences between domestic civil society organizations and international ones like INGOs, international non-government organizations. The domestic CSOs often don't have funding to operate, whereas the international ones not only have funding, but the government can't get information about it and doesn't know what they're doing, and there are issues there of accountability. And that's not true. That's true not only for CSOs, but even for bilateral aid. Sometimes that's not all that well integrated into the government's domestic priorities, especially if it goes direct to non-government organizations. Okay, and we finished off with another hard question about decentralization. We had a great intervention from Indonesia where there are 70,000 villages. So you can imagine decentralization is difficult in those circumstances, and it's hard to ensure accountability from the ground, from the bottom level up to the top. Okay, and it was a wonderful discussion. Thank you to those who participated.
So it's a lot to capture, sort of 4 hours of discussion into key points, but I'm going to try. The groups that I am reporting back specifically talked about social mobilization, advocacy, and communication, and strategies that they are adopting in their countries to make it more effective. In the morning, we heard from 3 main countries, Zimbabwe, Nepal, and Uganda, who've done quite a bit to actually develop national strategies already. They focused on the process that they've used in their countries, the key challenges that they faced, and how specific people from within key ministries had been able to bring people together in their roles to make sure that there is one single national plan of communication and advocacy that was pulled together. There was a lot of discussion which really parallels some of the ones that Sue said, particularly around roles of private sector, role of media, the roles of civil society, and there was a lot of engagement there. But I think the main takeaways, if I can read it out, hang on one second. The following is that there was a reaffirmation that there should be a multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder approach to advocacy, and that strategy should be designed to encourage and ensure accountability of all actors. Most people recognize the importance of engaging and working with private sector, but I think they are ready to figure out how to have sort of conflict of interest policies. What do they look like? How do we engage? How to make sure that it's, that there is a constructive engagement that happens. There was very interesting discussion around that. There was also recognition that while we need to have some harmonized core messages that are strong, clear, and coherent, they also need to be very clearly and adequately and effectively delivered across sectors, political parties, levels of government, and communities, and that there needs to be reshaping of that effectively to meet different target audiences. In the afternoon, I think there was a lot of discussion on looking at a community of practice around social mobilization, advocacy, and communication. What would that look like? And I think the group also had some interesting key points about the power of youth and women as effective communicators, how to bring that out more strongly. And really the importance of media as a key player in ensuring accountability. How do we engage with them effectively to do that? So I think those were the main things that came up.
Thank you. The session on strengthening accountability through stakeholder mapping and use of dashboard for monitoring included 7 countries, namely Guatemala, Uganda, Tanzania, Burkina Faso, Mauritania, Ghana, and Sri Lanka. So we had excellent contribution from these countries, and all the countries were able to describe and share their experiences in terms of the steps that they have taken to improve this stakeholder mapping or to use the dashboard. And it appears globally that we all recognize that this is a critical piece for us if we want to implement effectively the multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder approach that we are all trying to do. The leadership of the government has come out very, very strongly. Without this leadership from the government, it's quite difficult to do that, particularly using reference documents and ensuring that there is a clear alignment to the priorities of the countries. But then the one constant that has come out also is that it's good to of course, map the stakeholders. It's good to map the intervention. It's good to be able to have the coverage. But is it enough to ensure that we have coherence? And coherence in the work of different partners on the ground might require some skills, might require strong leadership, and just mapping might not be enough. So this come out as kind of recommendation where we will need probably to work a bit much more. On the second aspect, use of dashboard or any other tool to monitor the result and progress. This also was, we had also good experiences sharing from the countries, and it appears that if we want to ensure that we are able to monitor progress, to monitor to what extent are we on track, to what extent are we moving towards our goal, we need to ensure that we have both horizontal but also vertical monitoring system, and ensure that the indicators or the tracers are well linked to the determinant of what we want to achieve, not only to the activities, but to the determinant, and ensure also that it becomes sustainable. And to that, it also came that if we are able to involve the communities and civil society, this might be a guarantee for us to ensure that it becomes sustainable. The last point that came out is on capacities. Whether we want to ensure that monitoring is well done, sustainable, and whether we want to ensure that stakeholder mapping is useful and play a role, we need to ensure that capacity is there. So capacity development is a key point that also came out from the discussion, both in terms of skills, but also knowledge, competencies, so that we can also implement and move it forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm reporting on community of practice number 4, which is strengthening functional capacities. And the basic notion there is that all or almost all Sun countries by this point have a national platform and at various stages of creating the subnational platforms. And the big challenge now is how to make them functional in the full sense and all of the senses of that word. So there were 2 sessions this morning. One on mechanisms for strengthening alignment and engagement, and the other on leadership, building and sustaining leadership and trust. The COP4 sessions, I think, were a little differently organized than the others. We heard from 4 or 5 countries in each of these 2 sessions, and then 4 or 5 panelists sharing their experiences or interrogating those countries, and then we had small group work. And we had about 80, 85 people in each of the 2 sessions. So asking a professor to summarize this in 2 minutes is really cruel and unusual punishment, but I'll try. So on the session on engagement and alignment, we heard from Nepal, Tanzania, Ghana, and Rwanda. And in the small groups, there were 6 small groups in the room. All I can do is give you a sense of the topics that were discussed and the volume of information that came out. And I think this is an example of the wisdom of the crowd, or more appropriately, wisdom of the movement. And it's an affirmation of how important these communities of practice are, and how we need to really tap them and develop them moving forward. So in this particular session, one small group discussed challenges related to engagement and alignment. And in 10 short minutes, they came up with 5 key, insightful challenges. They got right to the root of the issue. Another group discussed characteristics of effective stakeholder engagement and alignment. What should we be striving for if we want to have it? They came out with 6 characteristics of effective engagement and alignment. The third group discussed strategies for getting there. If we know where we want to get, how can we do it in practical terms? They came out with 4 strategies in 10 minutes. The next group discussed what are the necessary structures and reference documents that should exist in order to guide the whole effort. Mind you, these multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral platforms are quite large and quite diverse. There needs to be clear structures and reference documents to guide them. The next group discussed what are the incentives and low-hanging fruit in order to get people to engage, and then once engaged, get them to align as well. A really nuts and bolts type question, and 7 suggestions came from that group. And finally, what about roles and responsibilities? What are the roles and responsibilities for the different structures and sectors and platforms? And they came up with 5 different recommendations. So as I say, this is really an affirmation of the wisdom of the movement and the need for us to learn how to tap it and make it available horizontally as well as vertically. The other session was on, if I can find my notes, was on trust and leadership. And I want to go into a little more detail, maybe a minute and 15 seconds on this one, because this is really the bedrock. Everything I just mentioned about alignment and engagement can work and will only work if there's strong, effective trust and leadership on these platforms and among these organizations. So we heard from Ghana, Myanmar, Zambia, El Salvador, and Senegal. And all I'll give you is 2 categories: some principles that emerged for how to build and sustain trust and leadership, and some strategies for reaching that. In terms of principles, it was clear from all of the discussion, a common vision, a commonly held and felt sense of goals is critical. And this should be backed up by high-level commitments, and perhaps even a legal framework whenever that can be created. That's what can bring people together and have the basis for moving forward together. Secondly, since these are diverse platforms, to identify and respect and value the complementary contributions and strengths and roles that each can bring. Only then can trust develop, if one feels like they are respected and valued for what they can bring. Third, transparency, another bedrock principle. Fourth, since conflicts of interest of various forms will always exist, there needs to be an explicit recognition that that is the case, that's the nature of the world, and there needs to be the capacity, the ability, and the tools to manage those conflicts when they emerge and manage them constructively and keep the group together. Fourth, with respect to leadership, very important point came out. Let's not think of leadership as as that part of the system that has the anchorage. And we all look towards them for leadership. Beautiful quote came out, lead from where you are. We need leadership in each government ministry. We need leadership in each of the civil society members of the platform. We need leadership from the business sector, and so on. With respect to how to move forward to this, an interesting discussion about how trust emerges. Trust is a human face-to-face phenomenon that develops between individuals or not. And so there needs to be formal and, more importantly, informal mechanisms for people to have that face-to-face interaction, and it needs to be sustained over time. It's not institutions that develop trust, it's human beings. And there need to be good constructive processes for the trust to emerge. Is there any way to predict that, to be sure that it's going to happen? Not really, not in all contexts. You have to trust the process, put in place good processes, and trust the process, and persevere, because it may not happen right away. Related to that, though there was a lot of wisdom and examples of trust emerging, it was clear we would benefit by tapping some of the global knowledge about the development of trust. I'm sure this is one of the most researched topics out there, and we should tap that and bring that into our practice. And finally, even recognizing that trust might develop between human beings who share a common goal and a common vision, let's not forget there are institutional mandates and interests and imperatives. Those will always be there in the background. And that's another part of the whole enterprise. But the point was made, let's not let that defeat us. Sometimes the tail can wag the dog. So when trust and common vision and commitment emerges, sometimes the tail can wag the dog. Thank you very much.
I think this is a very good follow-on from Community of Practice. I'm reporting the key message from the roundtable, the contribution of science to the Sun movement. And by listening to David and others, and you know, David, I think I just found another role for academia to do what you just do. It's not a punishment, but it's a role one can play in trying to bring all those messages and build some trust and leadership in between. This session of roundtable, the key message that came across was, in many countries, already the partnership exists between the stakeholders and academia. In most countries, they feel that they already have a critical mass of academics and professionals. So those are the treasure and resources that we have to appreciate and be able to optimize. A big challenge, though, is to communicate effectively between the science and stakeholder community. Policymakers have difficulties formulating questions that researchers can address. On the other hand, researchers produce information in a format that others have difficulty in understanding. So that's an important issue. And there is a need to develop a common agenda for research and priorities. Research information should state what is already known, be evidence-based and contextualized. And I would like to really thank the participants who contribute to this session. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and thank you to all the rapporteurs on the session. We haven't quite managed to stick to the 2 minutes per panelist, so we have accepted the honourable exception, I think, of a more very well done. But we have a little bit of time, not as much as we'd scheduled, for some comments from the floor. So I'll take, and again, trying to follow the excellent example of Imran from this morning, stand up and see who's offering to, because we do have a treat in store to conclude the day, and that's Lawrence Haddad's introduction to the Global Nutrition Report, which I'm sure many people all of you are probably greatly looking forward to hearing. But if there are a couple of comments, we'll take them. And if not, we'll move on to Lawrence. Well, maybe at this stage of the day, we will go directly to Lawrence. Would you like to join us on stage? And I think this may mean that we'll be saying goodbye to some of you. So thank you very much for your contribution. I think most of you, or many of you at least, will know of Lawrence. Lawrence has had a very distinguished career in a number of different places, in IFPRI and as director of the International Institute for Development Studies. And some time ago, after the Nutrition for Growth meeting in London in 2013, he was asked to take on the significant challenge of producing the first global nutrition report. And I know there's been a whole process of consultation that has gone on, and indeed I'm sure a number of you will have been involved in that. But while everything I've seen of it in its preparation attests to high quality, and I think it has the possibility of becoming the authoritative report on global nutrition, and consequently, I think, has the potential to be an advocacy tool and a policy influencing tool of considerable importance. So it's with great pleasure I could ask Lawrence to introduce it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Sun colleagues, for giving us some time in your precious plenary. We really appreciate it. The reason that Imon and Patrizia are up here is because they are part of the independent expert group that I co-chair with Srinath Reddy. So thank you for being up here and keeping me company as well, and answering all the hard questions. I really liked Earthryn Cousins' comments yesterday at the end of the day. I don't know if you remember. She said, it's 6 o'clock, it's Sunday evening, and you people are just raring to go still. You're not normal. And she said, but in a good way. So I'm going to try and tap into that energy today. This is the report. It's available in the marketplace. It's not in your bags, but it's in the marketplace, and we really don't want to carry any of them home. So please take them with you. The report is supposed to be a treasure trove, an evidence-based treasure trove for advocacy. It's the people who wrote the report. We like to think of ourselves as credible researchers, but we're also very much had in mind making this report an intervention and a support to others' intervention. So it's a treasure trove, I think, for advocacy. And let me walk you through it a bit. So the first thing it does is it does three things. It tries to assess progress towards malnutrition reduction. It tries to identify actions to accelerate progress, and it tries to make a contribution to improving accountability, our accountability to the people we care about. It's global in the sense of it focuses on all 193 countries, so it's not just about low and middle income countries, it's about every country and every country's malnutrition. It was convened by a stakeholder group from the Nutrition for Growth Summit from last year, and those stakeholders are listed on the back of the report. Their logos are there. They empowered an independent expert group of about 20 people, who I mentioned before. We pulled together 60 different authors, many of them in this room today. We also pulled together 80-plus indicators of nutrition, impact indicators, outcome indicators, program indicators, resource indicators, policy indicators, spending indicators, institutional transformational indicators, and pulled them all together for each country. And there are two-page country profiles that will be available on November 20th when we have the formal launch at the ICN2. and all the data that were provided by the countries, convened and added value and made interoperable by all the big UN agencies and by the Coverage Monitoring Network and by IFPRI and by a bunch of other organizations. They were all incredibly generous in working with us and making all the data open access. So you'll be able to download all the data in Excel format and in Stata format, hopefully by November 20th. Right, so the 7 key messages, and I'm just going to cycle through them quite quickly. Nutrition is a foundation for the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and we'll tell you why we thought that. Number 2, malnutrition is a concern for all countries, not just the low income, not just the middle income, not just the high income, but all countries. Number 3, multiple burdens are the new normal. When I was learning about malnutrition, and I'm still learning about it, we used to think you can deal with undernutrition and then obesity and overweight would be something you deal with later on. We heard about the double burden of malnutrition 15 years ago, perhaps, in terms of the context of the nutrition transition. But the current data, once you put the undernutrition data together with overweight and obesity, you feel that you can see that almost half of all countries are dealing with both of these issues at the same time. Number 4, progress is slow globally, but if you look behind the global numbers, what's behind the global numbers? Countries, country data. And there's some spectacular country advances, and I want to tell you a bit about those. We also concluded that we need more ambition on targets, not less. You might think, why? You're saying we're off track on the global targets, so why on earth are you talking about more ambition for global targets? I'll tell you why. 6, scaling up of interventions and actions we think is more possible than ever before. I'll explain why. And then finally, nutrition accountability needs strengthening. That was our big final conclusion. It needs strengthening. So the conveners of the Nutrition for Growth event last year, we think they were accurate in their sense that we need to strengthen accountability within the system at all levels and for all stakeholders. So first point, good nutrition is a foundation for sustainable development. And in the report, we cycle through all the SDGs and we talk about the connections between the SDGs and nutrition in terms of evidence-based. And we cycle through all the familiar arguments because the audience for the report is in the nutrition community, but it's also people outside the community. So we cycle through the arguments that you are familiar with. 45% of all child deaths originate from poor nutrition. This is under 5. So 8 of those 17 children won't make it to their 5th birthday. We also do some new analysis of the economics, and we show that for every dollar you invest, every rupee, every peso you invest in scaling up nutrition-specific interventions to 90%, you get 16 back. So for every dollar you invest, you get 16 back over the life course. We did this estimate for 40 different countries. The range was about $4 per dollar to about $50 per dollar. For those of you who play the stock market, that's equivalent to a 10% compound rate of interest over a 30-year period, which is better than the Dow Jones performance over the last 80 years. We don't just talk about undernutrition, we also talk about overweight and obesity, and we scour the literature to pull together the evidence, and we boil it down into a number of numbers, but this is a number from the US. 10% of median income is lost to obesity in the workplace. That's just workplace losses, and that's because of absenteeism and presenteeism, which was a new word for me. I'll explain it later. We also cycle through all the arguments about good nutrition supports intergenerational equity. Sustainable development at its core is all about intergenerational equity. Some of you may be thinking about it in terms of climate. Mary Robinson talked about climate a lot yesterday. That's intergenerational equity, and we are the people who can break intergenerational inequity and intergenerational poverty through dealing with undernutrition at a very early age. But despite all of this, the number of times nutrition is mentioned in 169 SDG targets, 1. No matter which language you use, the number is 1. So we need to intensify efforts to embed nutrition more broadly in the SDGs. I think we've got 3 to 6 months to do this. And we need to do it because this is the accountability framework for development for the next 15 years. Second point, whichever way you look at the world, malnutrition affects every country. We think the new normal is now countries that are dealing with undernutrition and overweight and obesity at the same time. In fact, 45% of countries are having to do this. So we need to see malnutrition in multiple dimensions. Put on your 3D glasses and see malnutrition in multiple dimensions. We can't let complexity be a barrier to action. It has to be a spur to innovation and more strategic thinking about nutrition. Number 3, the world is off course. These are the 6 WHO indicators and the targets for them. I'm sure you know them very well. At a global level, we're off course for all of them. We're doing the best in stunting, and we're doing a little bit better in exclusive breastfeeding, but the others, it's just a train wreck. All of them are kind of a train wreck. But behind that global number, a number of countries are really on course for the WHO targets. In fact, 69 of the 100 countries that we have data for on 4 of these indicators, 69 are on track for 1 or more of these targets. The downside to that is 31 countries are not on course for any of them. Which countries are making great strides forwards? I don't have enough time to talk about all of them, but here are 3 of the indicators: under 5 stunting, under 5 overweight, and exclusive breastfeeding. And I've highlighted some countries that have very high levels of these issues, have very high levels of stunting, high levels of overweight, low levels of exclusive breastfeeding, but nevertheless are making very rapid progress in terms of declines in stunting and overweight and improvements in exclusive breastfeeding. And they're big countries with lots of kids in them. So I think fantastic cause for optimism there. And when good things align, when knowledge, funding, commitment, coverage, underlying trends align, extraordinary things can happen. We have a case study in the report about Maharashtra. You've heard a lot about that, and rightly so. Stunting fell from 37% to 24% in 7 years. That's faster than any other country. It's almost as fast as China. It's extraordinary. We did an analysis of it. We summarized the analysis. We felt the declines were real, and they were driven by 3 sets of things: economic growth and poverty reduction, very strong; nutrition and health missions. This is a public declaration of commitment by senior politicians that we are going to do something about nutrition, and if you don't, we are willing to be held accountable for it. There was also improved program performance, ICDS, PDS. Frontline staff were recruited. 50% vacancy rates fell to 15% vacancy rates, and nutrition spending increased. 50% from a low base, but they increased. And all of that together made for extraordinary things to happen. So we often think of the nutrition context as not terribly dynamic. But actually, when you get behind the global numbers and look at the country numbers, it's highly dynamic. There's new data, new modeling, new funding, and new commitment. And we document all of that in the report. And using that as a basis, we think the need to increase ambition on progress, we need to up our game on ambition. We think the 2030 goals, remember the SDGs are around 2030 goals, they must be more than business as usual extensions of the 2025 WHO goals. It'd be very easy just to sort of extend the WHO 2025 goals to 2030 on the same rate, on the same basis. But if we believe the new India data that are out, and where they still need to be ratified by the government and by WHO and UNICEF, but if we believe those, the decline in stunting is twice as fast as the decline we've seen prior to 2012. And if that's true, then we've got 10 million less stunted kids than we thought we did a couple of months ago. We're already halfway towards the goal. We're projecting 123 million stunted kids by 2025. Our goal is 100 million kids. If we've got an extra 10 million, we're already halfway to closing that gap. We talk about nutrition programs, and state the obvious, nutrition programs need to be scaled up, but that's not just about coverage, that's also about the signal, the quality of the intervention. And we look at wherever possible, we look at 8 different programs or practices in the nutrition-specific area. And there's a very crowded slide, I apologize for that, but each of those columns is a different nutrition-specific program or practice. And what the arrows show is the range of coverage from different countries. So, for example, the one on the left is iron folate supplementation during pregnancy for more than 90 days. And we have Nicaragua at 79% coverage of the mothers that need that, 79% are getting that. The country with the lowest level of coverage is 0.1. And if you go through all of these, you can see that some countries just achieve extraordinary coverage rates. And if only we could put together Nicaragua's performance on the first one, Malawi's on the second one, Rwanda's on the third one, Honduras is on the fourth and fifth, etc., we'd have this incredible nutrition-specific coverage playlist, which would really move the needle on nutrition. So we need to find out more about why some countries do well on some interventions, but not on all of them. We also talk about nutrition-sensitive interventions, and we say, look, we need to do much better at speaking the language of these other sectors, of agriculture, of water and sanitation, of social welfare, of education, of women's empowerment, of social protection. We need to do a much better job of speaking their language. And why do we need to do that? Because if you look at expenditure data, if you look at, these are expenditure data from Africa from 2010, I could have presented expenditure data from Asia and gotten the same basic numbers. If you look at those, you see that 35%, so everything outside of that grey 65%, 35% of those African budgets, on average, are spent on agriculture, education, health, and social protection. We didn't have data on WASH. If we had data on WASH, that would probably be 60%, so 40% spent on those sectors that are so important, potentially, for improving nutrition. If we can get some of that money working for nutrition, we'd really be able to accelerate nutrition faster. I think a final section is around accountability. And we say we need to hold ourselves to account, and that graphic is supposed to symbolize mutual accountability. One of the fundamental building blocks of any accountability mechanism between citizens and governments is being able to figure out how much do governments actually spend on different things. That's supposed to reflect the wants and needs of the citizens of that society. When we did the exercise, and we had to finish all our substantive work by the middle of September in order to get this thing edited and formatted, we only actually had data from Guatemala on, that said, this is how much we spend on nutrition. Since then, we've got data from Tanzania and Zambia, and I heard yesterday we have Costa Rica and Malawi is on the way. So that's great. But we need much more, much clearer, much better defined data from government budgets on what is being spent on nutrition. Not even what is being spent, what is being planned to be spent on nutrition. And then we can get what's spent, but let's just get the planning first of all. So we found them untracked, but not untrackable. There's different ways of doing it. Some of them are very sophisticated. Some of them are actually rather straightforward. You just need to do them. In terms of accountability, one of our remits was to assess the Nutrition for Growth commitments, the commitments that were made a year and a half ago behind the increase in spending of $4 billion over the 2013 to 2020 period. Those were the commitments, the financial commitments. Behind those commitments, there were a bunch of financial and non-financial commitments. There were 168 of them. Made by governments, NGOs, the UN, businesses, all kinds of agencies. We tracked all 168 commitments. Thank you to many of you in the room for being really patient with us in terms of supplying the information. The good news is that 43% of the commitments, our assessment, and you don't have to take our word for it, you can go and look at the original commitments and the original responses. They're all online. And you can make your own assessment of whether you think on track, off track is fair or not. But our assessment was that 43% of those are on course, and only 9% of them are off course. That's good, really good. 11% of them we didn't get a response to. That's not so great, but it's not bad, 89% response rate. I think the really worrying number there is the 37, where it was just not clear. It wasn't clear whether they were on course or off course, because either the commitment was really vague, or the response to the commitment was really vague. So clearly we can do better on accountability. Still on accountability, we got some numbers from 13 different nutrition external funders, donors, if you like, Bilaterals as well as a couple of foundations. They gave us data on disbursements and commitments for 2010 and 2012. The good news is that the nutrition-specific disbursements have increased between 2010 and 2012 by 30%, and the nutrition-sensitive ones have increased by 19%. They're using the Sun methodology, and I think the estimates were generated for the Sun movement. I think the less good news is that while the numbers have increased, they're still actually very small in relation to overall overseas development assistance. Overall overseas development assistance was $135 billion last year, and these circles are in proportion to the numbers. So $500 million nutrition specific, $1 billion nutrition sensitive. So numbers going up, great, well done. Is there a potential for an increase in the numbers? I think so. Businesses that balance short-term and long-term thinking. We talked a bit about businesses, but business was really a casualty of the first report's short timeline and our desire just to do the basic things well. So we didn't do as much on business as we wanted to. We were really upfront and honest about that. We worked with the Sun Business Network quite closely, and the next report will do a much better job on businesses. But nevertheless, we did we did monitor businesses' commitments made at N4G around healthy workforce, their commitments around ensuring a healthy workforce. And again, the good news is that 3-to-1, the commitments were on track as opposed to off track. We still on accountability, we made a big deal about empowered citizens, and strong accountability needs empowered citizens. Michael Anderson talked yesterday about no major social movement has ever succeeded without really strong participation from civil society, and most of the time leadership from civil society. That's why I personally am so excited about Sun as a movement. I think that's the right term and the right framing for this movement. We talk about the need for empowered citizens, but we also say you can't just expect civil society to do this without investment. So we say you need to invest in civil society to do this, and we talk a bit about some of the tools that civil society is already using and could be scaled up and could be innovated around. We talk about participatory budgeting, citizen report cards, social audits, community scorecard. There's lots of evidence from fields outside of nutrition that these things really work. And we think that there aren't enough of them within nutrition. I'm nearly finished, Tom. You say you want a revolution. We talk about nutrition data revolutions here. Why do we talk about nutrition data revolutions? It's easy to say that without having any basis for saying that. We think there are some really glaring nutrition data gaps. Here are a few of them. 49% of countries don't have enough data to assess if they are on or off course for 4 WHA indicators. That's kind of extraordinary. And actually, the worst offenders are the high-income countries, because the data they collect aren't compatible with the WHO and UNICEF global reporting requirements. Don't forget, the WHO indicators are global indicators. So high-income countries, you've had 2 or 3 years to get your act together, to get your data in line with WHO and UNICEF reporting. 40% of the most recent child growth surveys are over 5 years old. Many of you have heard me say it before. You wouldn't run an economic program on data that were 5 years old. Why would you run a nutrition program on data that are 5 years old? Invest in nutrition data. It's a great investment. Very particular, and this was just our take. Each of you will have your own take on where the big gaps are. We thought food consumption, low birth weight, anemia, financial investments in nutrition, program coverage, stock of capacity. We felt that these were really key data gaps, and the data were very, very weak. And this is my final slide. So recommended actions. Embed nutrition more strongly in the SDGs. We really need to do this, because if we miss the boat, we kind of missed the boat on the MDGs. Despite that, having underweight in the poverty MDG was, I think, useful for a number of us. But we can do much better than that. We need to, at a minimum, get all 6 WHA indicators into the SDGs. The 6 WHA indicators were signed off on by all ministers of health. How much more powerful a lobby do you need to get those into the SDGs? Develop more ambitious targets. I've already talked about that. Embrace the complexity of multiple burdens. Don't be put off by it. Don't stick your head in the sand about it, but be more strategic. Figure out what needs to be done first. Figure out what the trade-offs are. And my own personal view, and this isn't the view of the IEG, is that of course Sun has to be inclusive and include middle-income countries and even high-income countries. It's just my personal view. The days of when malnutrition was a problem only for the low-income countries, they had a monopoly on the problems, and the high-income countries had a monopoly on the solutions, those days are over, if they ever even existed. We have to find resources, we have to have a relentless focus on coverage of nutrition-specific interventions. The countdown to 2015, which many of you know, does this fabulously. They focus on coverage. They focus on coverage because coverage is tangible, it's a demonstration, obviously it matters, it's tangible, and it's a demonstration of commitment. It's a very tangible demonstration of commitment. It's something that government and NGOs can control. You can't always control the rate of decline of stunting and wasting. There's lots of other things happening. But governments can control the rate of coverage of interventions. So focus on that. Find resources outside the health sector for nutrition-sensitive interventions. Social protection is just going to explode in sub-Saharan Africa in the next 10 years. Spending on it. If we can get a bit of that to be nutrition-focused, that could have a massive impact. Invest in a nutrition data revolution. And then, again, echoing something a number of people said yesterday at the plenary, be the change you want to see. If you want more accountability in nutrition, be accountability champions. Thank you.
Lawrence described at the beginning, he said this was a treasure trove of a report. We can see now just the extent of the treasure that's there and the extent of the possibilities I think it gives rise to this community of people who are in this room. We have time for some comments, some reflections from the floor. Yeah, first comment. If we just say who you are, if you don't mind.
Thank you very much. Mon nom est Haladou Salha, je représente l'Union africaine et le NEPAD. Je viens de...
I have just listened to quite a bit of extremely important information. We know very well that the documents which were given to us are very important, especially for each and every member state and every single region, especially from the point of view of lobbying. I would like to launch an appeal with the cooperation of WFP. A special study is being carried out on nutrition, but where we have a problem is with the budget of the state, the financing of the whole thing, because it is a study on the social economic impact of malnutrition of children. So what we would have hoped is that all the partners that have contributed to this very well-structured report be able to help. That is to say that WFP and the African Union be able to carry out this study in our country, because of the case studies that were carried out in 10 countries, only 5 were finished. So this is a wonderful opportunity for lobbying, and with the ministers of finance and planning, because they're the ones that decide on the budget allocation. So if they are convinced of the effects of malnutrition in a country, in each and every country, this is a problem for the children, because they will pay better attention to what we were saying all day today. On the other hand, I'm an agroeconomist, And when we speak of malnutrition, people tell you, well, you have to produce more and better in order to be able to have access to more food for the people. Yes, of course, but you have to produce high quality food. And of course, I'm convinced of this because I have been here in this house for about 20 years. I know what it's all about. But I'm not the one who makes the decisions. So all these tools for advocacy be used in each and every country. And also, we must see to it that the people, the decision makers, are properly, well, I would say even educated properly, so they'll be able to take the necessary decisions to integrate this strategy for nutrition in each and every country. This is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
I just realised that we should have also up here on stage with us Mohammed Al-Bendict of FAO, if you're here. Could you join us? Okay, in that case. Yourself at the back, please.
Voy a hablar en español. Buenas tardes.
I shall speak in Spanish. Good afternoon. Fernando Sales, Secretary of State for Nutrition in Guatemala and responsible for the focal point in Guatemala. This report referred not explicitly to the situation in 2012 concerning what was done in Guatemala, concerning the budget as well as the real nutrition actions, specific actions, and all the others referring to nutrition. This is a document of the Ministry of Public Finances of the year 2012, and it is, of course, open to everyone to read. I would like to know if this is the document which was mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a very specific question. Yourself, please. Here in the middle.
Thank you very much. I must congratulate you for this report. I do not seem to see people appreciate the alarm that has that word you said, UN, UNO, that it's only once in the entire SDGs document. I was at the UN General Assembly in September. I'm going to New York immediately after here, and we are engaging with the SDGs. There seems not to be the sense of alarm that needs to be there amongst all levels that are engaged with the SDGs to have nutrition within there. Where do you think the problem is? And I think we need to have that sense of alarm drummed now, because we have a few weeks and this window will close. I thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Maybe we'll go to Lawrence and any other comments that arise from the comments from the floor. Lawrence, first of all, please. Do you want to take the mic? Yeah.
Maybe just to answer on the Guatemala very specific question, it was a panel done by Clara, so she's here and she worked with someone from the government of Guatemala that provided the panel. So it was a collaboration. In fact, it was a co-authored panel. I think it was Dr. Jesus, what was it? Bullocks, yeah. So just to answer to the question that it was done together.
Fine. I mean, I think you can follow that up directly as well after this conversation. But some of the other points, and maybe that last point here is really important, I think, gentleman from Uganda.
Yeah, I'm being a little bit mischievous by saying it appears once out of 169 times. It does only appear once. It refers to two of the indicators. So, but four of the 6 WHA indicators are not mentioned. Now, I think there's space for the 4 more nutrition indicators in the SDG targets. We've got to make them, we've got to get them in there. We can't assume that someone else is going to do it for us. So I'm with you. I don't think we're being alarmist. I think it's really a worry. And I think it reflects, I don't know what it reflects. I don't want to say what it reflects. Your point about the cost of hunger and the World Food Programme, we do talk about the cost of hunger study in the report, and we do talk about how important it is, and we cite it. I think this kind of information is absolutely critical to get ministers of finance, ministers of planning interested in this issue. And I think as more African presidents and ministers of finance get excited and interested about the demographic dividend, this is the idea that the ratio of working age people to non-working age people is going to peak in 20 years' time as all these people enter the labor force and they don't have to take care of as many kids. That will be a dividend if they learn stuff in school and they can get good jobs. But if they have poor nutrition now, there won't be a demographic dividend in 25 years' time. So I think we've got to be really clever about how we communicate and speak their language. And there was another question, but I've forgotten what it was.
Well, maybe Emma, is there any comment you'd like to make at this stage?
Yes, that has to do with the SDG and the alarm that you just said. I think we have multi-stakeholder platform for the Sun. And when you engage with the non-health sector, I think it's important to convey the message of how nutrition could help education, could be part of social integration, could be helpful to the problems of what we have in terms of productivity, work performance, and all the statistics that was in the report and also has been shown with the Copenhagen Consensus should be used to convince others. The message, if you want nutrition to be part of SDG, is to be carried by education sector and all those others to the forefront that we want nutrition there. It's not because we want to push it, but they are willing to embrace it. So I think this is an important thing, and you all here are advocates of nutrition. You believe it was going to make a difference in your country. So you have to help. It's in your hands. We have to bring nutrition to SDG. That window will close very soon. So act now. Thank you.
Could I just add to that? Because I think there are quite a number of countries, including a number of countries where Sun is well established and going reasonably well in the countries, beginning to have impact. But somehow or other, that message is not translating to the relevant foreign ministries in these countries, which are dictating what's said by their countries' ambassadors in New York in negotiating the SDGs. So somehow or other, there is a challenge, I think, for members of the Sun community to engage directly with foreign ministries who are engaged in these negotiations to get your message across. Any other comments? Gentleman here. And
thank you. My name is Charles McLean. I'm the Deputy Minister of Agriculture from Liberia. And I just want to say a big thank you to the Sun movement and for my being here. As I said before, I thought Liberia was the youngest baby into the movement since we joined in February of this year. But then I learned that I think Somalia joined in July, so we're a little older. But I've heard a lot this is my first time at this gathering, even though I participated a lot in the teleconferences in Monrovia, at UNICEF, who is presently our donor convener, interim donor convener. And I know that Liberia has a long way to go. We had nutritional issues before Ebola came. And since Ebola, we have gone back a little bit. So we have a little ways to catch up. But I'm glad because we have the resources, we have examples, we have countries that have made progress, and we know that we can do it because we need to do it. There are so many lives at stake, and we need to be concerned about the future of our children. So I just want to say thanks to all of you, Tom, Lawrence, everybody. And I want to say that when this Ebola thing really, really comes to an end, we're going to be knocking on your door because we need to move and push the nutrition agenda forward. Thank you very much.
And Charles, thanks to you for being here at this time of serious difficulty for your country and for spending the time with us. I think it's very important. We have over here a comment.
Thank you, Tom. I'm Mela McLaughlin. I have a question about the human resource issue. Lawrence, I didn't hear, I know you said something about it in the report about champions, and I'd really like to hear a little bit more about what you think, whether we also don't need a human resource revolution for nutrition. Thank you.
Do you want to take that, Lawrence, or do you want another question to go with it? Yeah, no, okay, we'll take that. Take that now, yeah.
Tom's not giving me any time to think of a good answer to that question. Yes, of course we do. I mean, Stuart and I and Sean and lots of people in this room are really obsessed by capacity issues. And it's easy to say you need a data revolution, but you also need people to want the data, to collect the data, to analyze the data, to act on the data, to say, you know, all of these things. And that's just data stuff. Then there's a whole range of other capacities. The returns to capacity, it seems to me, are very high. We haven't been able to quantify them in ways that investors find terribly attractive, I think. So whether it's knowledge at the front lines or knowledge in other sectors or knowledge of how to scale up, we haven't been very good at sort of saying if you invest in this type of capacity, you will get this type of return. And we haven't really been very good at even identifying where are the areas to invest, because capacity is something that is slippery to measure quantitatively. So you probably know more about this than I do, Miller, but we do talk, there's a technical panel, there are 12 technical panels, and that's one of the areas that we highlight. And we've got a really nice panel on what to do to improve measurement, because we think measurement's the first thing to do. So yes, I agree with you completely.
I mean, this is clearly the first in a series of reports, and I think as we go forward, the completeness and relevance of it is going to increase. Sir.
Yes, good afternoon. Hugh Bagnall-Lakely, Save the Children. I just wish to note that the CADAP results framework has actually got nutrition as one of the strategic objectives, and one opportunity is that in 2015, something like 9 or 10 in agricultural investment plans are actually up for review and renewal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're getting close to closure, but maybe we'll have, I think there's a gentleman from Somalia here, I think in particular, who, the latest child of the sun.
Okay, let me congratulate Somalia being the youngest.
Stand up maybe.
At the same time, the oldest. Yeah. Hi all. Thank you very much. We are very much happy, in fact, to be part of SUN movement. Somalia being one of the countries that is hit mainly by malnutrition, in fact, and it hosts, I can say, most of the malnourished children, most of them in Africa, if they are not there. However, I have one question for the SUN movement, and the presentation for the report was very good, but it looked like as it was focusing on countries that are able to scale up nutrition movement, not countries that are preparing to scale up. So we were asked to fly before we bathe the runway. So we're preparing the runway. So what I wanted to find out is, from the gathering, are we creating inequity in a way that we expect every country to scale up nutrition activities in their country? I'm not saying that that's not, I'm not omitting the country responsibility. It has to be there, in fact. And the country has to show high political commitment, at the same time engagement into the activities to be done. But what are the mechanisms that can assist countries to come up into a stage that they can scale up nutrition in their country? Thank you very much.
Lawrence?
As much as we are the youngest, can I add one more question to the Haddad?
Okay.
Go ahead. Thanks for the nice presentation of the report. I really appreciate it. You put a lot of effort, it's you and your team. So what I want to ask you is said more ambition, 2030. If we look back, starting from the Health for All due to Alma Ate, 1978, then come to the 20,000 vision for health, and come to the Millennium Development Goal, MDGs. Now you are talking about the SDG. So how you ensure, how can we reach our ambition? We have come up a lot of visions, but the Millennium Development Goal is, have we learned from them? Some lessons from them? So I'm asking you a very critical question, not you, but have you identified among the report, how can we ensure the 2030, or it will be like the other visions that we passed it earlier? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Two really, really easy questions. Thank you, guys. Great. Can you ask me something like, where is the next launch going to be, or something? On the scale up, I think there's no one way to scale up. Obviously, every country will find a different set of pathways to scale up, and you'll scale different things up. You need to scale up capacity, finances, political commitment, infrastructure, drugs, vitamin A supplements, all sorts of things need to be scaled. Again, the report talks a bit about this. We think that the most important thing to scale is commitment. Because once you scale commitment, you can begin scaling other things. And then once you succeed in scaling other things, that reinforces the commitment in the first place. So there's no real sequence and no real recipe for it. But I take your point that if your point was there are different ways of scaling up, I completely agree with you. And there's different sequences and different skills that need to be there. On the what do we learn from the MDGs? There have been analyses done of the MDGs. The three big conclusions are the MDGs helped divert more overseas development assistance to health. They helped divert more of it to sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And some of our colleagues, some of our nutrition investor colleagues in the audience would say having that underweight indicator in the poverty MDG gave them an excuse to exercise their nutrition championship within their organization. So if you're in the World Bank, having that indicator there means you can advocate for nutrition. So I think these things are not unimportant, but they can be much more important. And I think, again, this is a personal view, not a report view, that you need to have things that you really can hold governments and other organizations to account for, like spending, like program coverage. You can't hold them completely accountable for stunting and wasting and anemia, because lots of other things play into that. Globalization plays into that. Conflict plays into that. Weather shocks play into that. And governments simply don't control all of that stuff. But there are things they do control, and I think more of those need to make it into the SDGs to make it a more powerful accountability tool.
Amon?
If you look into the report, you will find amazingly that countries have made a lot of progress are those where we will feel resources not there, limited resources, but they can make the difference. They can fly high. So small birds can fly very high, like an eagle. So you have to make, the evidence to us is so compelling. We all can do it. So, you know, it's also remind me, if Usain Bolt can be the fastest man and he came from Jamaica, it makes a difference. You can all be there. So I really feel, make use of that report. And one of the things I want to say about data, if you take a look at the country, it's not because of lack of data that you cannot move. It's probably because it has never been optimized and synthesized, and also be able to, one of the evolution of the data is to take a look at take stock of what's there, how you can make it work for you, what are the gaps, and then also capacity to be able to feel that and make use of the things we do. In Thailand, I have to tell you, we have overwhelming data, and that has never been used. It was expensive to collect. So we have to make sure resources are well spent, collect what is useful. So those are some of the things I want to say. Thank you.
Pat, would you like to say?
Yeah, I would add to Amon and to Lawrence to really make use of the report. There are actionable recommendations at the end of the report, so they can be really looked at and reflected, and a lot of these recommendations are based then on data and on panels and on discussion that you find in the main content of the report. So I think it's a good tool to go through the year when you think about what you really want to advocate for and what you want to push for.
And Lawrence has the final word.
Thank you. Just a few points. Number one, there are going to be lots of roundtables over the next 4 to 5 months, where the report is an excuse to have a national discussion about key priorities for nutrition, what can be done better, what can be done faster, what should we stop doing, and there'll be 11 of those. If any of you are interested in having a roundtable in your country to use this as an excuse to have a discussion at a high level or a community level or whatever level you want, we are ready to support you to do that. Second thing is there's going to be a report next year and maybe a report in 2016. So give us ideas. Once you've had a chance to have a look at this, give us ideas for things you'd like us to emphasize next year, because it's very much a collective report. It was done by over 60 people. If you look at the acknowledgements page, there are hundreds of people that contributed to this report. It's a collective, so give us ideas for things you want us to do more of or less of next time around. And then finally, I think there are a number of questions around how does this fit into the overall accountability framework that's going to emerge out of the ICN2 in the next few days. And I don't know the answer to that, and I'll be really interested to find out. But we want to just be additive. We don't want to duplicate or substitute for anything else. We want to add, completely additive. So we'll be looking very much with very great interest to see how we can add to what you're doing and to what others are doing in this accountability space.
Thank you. Thank you, Lawrence, and thank you for the whole presentation. It was tremendous. I said it with Lawrence was having the final word. He's not quite having the final word. One of the very unusual parts of a Sun Global Gathering is that we haven't had the person who's perhaps most identified with Sun in the whole world, David Nabarro, because he's been doing heroic work on the Ebola crisis. And it's wonderful that David is here with us. He only arrived last evening, but I am so delighted, as I'm sure all the rest of you are delighted, to actually see him in the flesh. And now we're going to hear him. David.
Yeah. I just wanted to say how wonderful it is to be here with you all today, and I'm going to try and be here for some of tomorrow as well. It's fabulous. So many people who've been working now with the movement since we started in 2010. Others, as we heard just now from our colleague from Liberia, have just started. So we'll be talking a bit this evening and tomorrow. But I wanted to take the opportunity just to thank Lawrence and the team, and also Anna Taylor, who's sitting right at the back from UK, who's been really the visionary behind this, for what I think is an absolutely fantastic report. It's a really good report. Those of you who got a copy of it, at the end is the section titled Key Messages and Recommendations. And the writers of the report say, this report is aimed at nutrition champions and their allies wherever they are, at the global, regional, national, and subnational levels. Isn't it great to have a report that's not written for the bosses in New York or in Geneva, Washington, London? It's written for all of you. And so I hope you can take it, use it. When you're trying to explain things to people, have it behind you, hide it, and say, aha. You give them the facts, and then you say, here it is in the report. So on behalf of all of those who've been working on this issue for some years, I'd like just to give a very, very special thank you to Lawrence and the team. Thanks.
And could I just add my words of congratulations to Anna at the back there, who was so instrumental in keeping everyone's nose to the grindstone as this whole process unfolded. It's been another very good day, I think. The energy is still here. I hope it's not, there's still another little event, I think, for some of us to go off to the FAO. And I hope we'll see you all back in the morning. And I hope you all enjoyed today and will enjoy the rest of it. Thank you very much.
Hi, how are you? Yeah. I just wanted to say hi because you've been so active, sitting there first which is great. No, it's, I think it's kind of late roundabout now. It is. Oh, wait, and I saw around here, it's all over the building. It's fantastic.
Well, it's one of the big things for the evening. Most of the big meetings that we have, we always have this big board and people come and sign and everything. So, but keep in touch, eh? So maybe we can have coffee tomorrow or this week. Are you going to be at ICF as well?
I will tell you that nutrition
Lovely to see you.
but I'll
Yeah, so we may have to very, very wow. Charles, I'm so pleased you came. Yeah, showing people stuff is still going well in